The story begins in a sinister room where a young woman is gagged and trapped on a table. She cannot scream, but we see her expression of panic when a hooded figure enters the room, dragging a heavy hammer on the floor. There is a small hole in the wall, and someone is on the other side watching as the figure approaches the girl and raises the hammer. Next, we meet the young woman named Alisa, who is dealing with an unwanted pregnancy right during the probation period of her new job. Her mother decides that it is best to terminate the pregnancy and informs her that she has already made an appointment at the clinic. Alisa seems a bit uncertain, but her mother does not give her a chance to change her mind. The procedure is scheduled for the following day, and the clinic is close to her parents' home in Calabria. Treating the subject lightly, her mother tells her that they can also use the visit to refresh her wardrobe. Alisa decides to obey her mother and arranges for a ride through a carpool app. The driver who arrives to pick her up is named Fabrizio, and he is an unsuccessful influencer. The other passengers are a grumpy doctor named Ricardo and a young couple attending a wedding, Sophia and Mark. During the ride, Sophia gets distracted with a trivia challenge app. Mark cheers up when Fabrizio says there are cold beers in the back of the trailer and even promises to give him 5 stars. He brings one for Alisa, and she says she doesn't want it, but the boy is so insistent that she pretends to take a sip. The group has been on the road for some time when they pass a billboard that seems to have been vandalized in a macabre way. Mark is reading a news article about the disappearance of 2 women, a mother and daughter. The police suspect the local mafia, known as 'Ndrangheta, and the town's mayor promises to combat them more strictly. In the midst of this conversation, Alisa becomes very nauseous, and Fabrizio is forced to make an emergency stop. She runs out of the trailer and braces herself against a tree, not noticing a discreet mark around the trunk. The other passengers take the opportunity to get some fresh air as well, gossiping about Alisa behind her back. Ricardo steps away from the group to make a phone call and leaves a voicemail in a very distressed tone. He begs the person to return the call and mentions a problem with his daughter. After he hangs up, there is a commotion in front of the vehicle. A bit drunk, Mark is sitting behind the wheel and refuses to get out. He complains about the driver's slowness, saying he can get there much faster, but Fabrizio is desperate, as the trailer belongs to his mother. Noticing Ricardo's indignation, Mark asks if the doctor wants to drive himself, but he says he does not have his driver's license. Eventually, Mark wears down and takes the wheel on the next stretch. At night, the passengers fall asleep while Fabrizio keeps him company, and they start talking. Fabrizio says he studies cinema, but it is a highly competitive field in Italy, which is why he makes these short videos instead of actual movies. He also talks about his ear problem, which started when a bully smashed his head against the wall. Mark confesses that he was the bully in school and always took that brutality as a joke until one day someone got seriously hurt. They both toast when they are getting very close to a spot where an animal is lying in the middle of the road. Fabrizio screams, and Mark swerves sharply, losing control and crashing head-on into a tree. Alisa is the last to regain consciousness, and Mark suffers the worst, as his leg is severely injured. Ricardo does whatever he can with the little he has to care for him and asks someone to call an ambulance, but the cell phones have no signal. Impatient, Ricardo orders someone to go out and wave down the first car that passes on the road. They all get chills when Alisa looks out the window and incredulously states that there is no road. Coming down from the trailer one by one, the others confirm what she said. They have ended up in a very distant area from where they were, in a round clearing surrounded by dense forest. The only thing there besides the trailer is a rather strange-looking shack. Sophia knocks on the door and shouts, but it does not seem like anyone is there. Everyone returns to the trailer, and Ricardo tries to start it unsuccessfully. Mark does not believe the others when they explain that the road has vanished. He swears he hit a tree just a few meters from the shoulder, and it is impossible that the trailer has moved on its own. More and more furious with the kids' mishaps, Ricardo decides to walk in a straight line until he finds something that is not just a bunch of trees. Fabrizio suggests that he head south, and the doctor is a bit surprised by the boy's sense of direction. In the trailer, Alisa tries to send messages to her mother, but she cannot connect. Sophia comes to sit with her, and the two talk a bit. The girl says she has a 3D jewelry printing business, and Alisa explains that she is an intern at a consulting firm. In the forest, Fabrizio accompanies Ricardo on the walk, even against his will. Admitting he overheard the phone call earlier, he asks about his daughter. Ricardo says her name is Alma, but cuts the subject off firmly and changes the subject, stating that they should have at least seen the road by now. Fabrizio comments on a story where characters get trapped in a repetitive limbo, condemned to perform the same actions over and over without stopping. He is still explaining the story when the two suddenly stop, apparently haunted by the same thing. Meanwhile, Alisa looks out the trailer window and sees that the shack's door is now open. She tries to warn Sofia, but she is dozing off next to Mark. Ricardo and Fabrizio are still shocked by what they found, a sort of malignant altar made with logs and tree branches. At the top, 3 scarecrows have been erected, each wearing a red cloak. A sign right in the middle states that they are the 3 Knights of Honor. Beneath them is a series of stakes pierced into the ground, with the heads of various animals at the tips. Ricardo asks if that could be some sort of satanic ritual, but Fabrizio prefers not to stick around to find out and shows the other that the blood is still fresh. At the same time, Alisa decides to enter the shack. One of the walls is covered with old photographs where everyone is wearing a sort of animalistic mask with a pair of horns. She gets startled when a door slams at the end of the hallway and goes up to see what is on the other side. The room is a kind of altar, and the candles on the floor are still lit. When the others arrive, Fabrizio explains that this has to do with the legend of Osso, Mastroso, and Carcagnoso. A long time ago, these 3 brothers came from beyond to satisfy the hunger of a village in exchange for a sacrifice. The peasants who accepted the deal were never the same again, and the village became the flock of the 3 demons. Sofia does not believe in the supernatural and thinks someone is trying to scare the group. Since it is getting late, Ricardo suggests they spend the night in the vehicle and try to seek help the next day. In the middle of the night, Fabrizio goes a little ways off to relieve himself and realizes that this was a great mistake. As the fog drifts through the trees, it reveals a pair of figures dressed like the people in the photos, even with the masks. Without noticing his absence, Ricardo watches videos of his daughter Alma with an emotional expression. Suddenly, a woman's scream seems to come from the shack, and Sofia heads over there with Alisa. As there is no one downstairs, she pulls the hatch in the ceiling to go up to the attic. Ricardo watches from inside the trailer, waiting for the two to return, and almost dies of fright when Fabrizio suddenly appears. He says that there is someone in the woods and that they need to get out of there as soon as possible. The two decide to enter the shack as well, possibly hiding in the attic with the girls. However, the 4 discover that the room is already occupied. A girl is trapped in the middle of a cocoon made of twigs and cannot explain what happened because her tongue is in a glass jar on the floor. Sofia starts to pull the twigs to free her, but Fabrizio and Ricardo think it is a bad idea. Suddenly, a red light turns on outside, and a sort of alarm begins to sound. The little girl starts to cry as soon as this happens, and Sofia rushes to the window. She panics when the fog reveals the satanic farmers carrying Mark and wants to go down to save him, but the others do not let her. Fabrizio says they have a shotgun, and then they close the hatch, hiding there. Ricardo covers Sofia's mouth so she cannot scream when the hooded figures enter the shack, dragging Mark. They throw the young man onto the table, binding his wrists and ankles. One of them turns on a tape player, while the other brings the hammer down on each of Mark's feet, making him roar in pain. Next, a sinister contraption is positioned above his head, and someone starts turning the crank, lowering 2 sharp points toward his eyes. Everyone is horrified by the screams as the crank continues turning until the end. Then the music stops, and the lights go out. The next morning, Ricardo helps free the little girl, who runs straight to hug Alisa. Sofia is very disturbed as she passes by the table downstairs, and Alisa quickly returns to the trailer to get a pair of shoes for the girl. In this way, the group begins to cross the forest on foot, hoping to reach a road or village. After some time, they find a place full of abandoned or destroyed cars. Some seem to have come straight from a serious accident, and many belongings have been left there. Sofia concludes that their group was not the first, and the satanic farmers have had many other victims before. Focusing on more practical problems, Ricardo starts rummaging through the cars looking for something to eat or use for defense. He orders the others to do the same, yelling at everyone in an authoritative tone. This irritates Sofia, who has not yet forgiven him for preventing her from saving her boyfriend. Ricardo explodes at her and says that this is all Mark's fault, adding that it has not changed just because he is dead. The others are also shocked by his coldness. and Sophia raises suspicions about his profession since she has never seen a doctor who needs to hitchhike. Without responding to that, Ricardo says that Sophia could have tried harder to save her boyfriend. While they argue, Alisa goes to keep the little girl company and discovers that her name is Kiara. Flipping through her notebook, Alisa is moved to see a photo of the girl with her family. She asks Kiara if she knows how to get out of the forest, and she writes the answer in the notebook. The sentence merely says that this is not a forest. Before Alisa can ask more questions, that sound alarm starts going off again. Afraid, they halt their gathering and continue walking south as quickly as possible. However, after a few kilometers, they are completely stunned to see that they have arrived back at the same shack they left hours earlier. Ricardo starts shouting at Fabrizio, as he understands that this can only be a navigation error. He cries and swears that he wants to save himself as much as he does. The trailer has vanished, and the only remnant that it was even there is one of the beer bottles. With few alternatives for passing the night, the group decides to stay in the shack, which is the only available shelter. They share the one beer and open up about their pasts. Ricardo admits he lost his license due to a medical error that also caused his divorce, and now his ex-wife does not let him see his daughter. Fabrizio shares about a colleague who called him a mafioso and says he was so offended that he ordered him killed. Everyone starts laughing when they realize it was just a joke, and the mood lightens a bit. Later, only the two women remain awake, and Sophia reveals that she noticed Alisa's pregnancy. She tells her about her mother's strictness regarding her professional career, and Sophia gives her ring, printed in 3D, as a keepsake. In the middle of the night, the alarm starts again, and the noise wakes Alisa. She goes to the shack door, and the red light turns off as soon as she steps outside. In the middle of the clearing, dozens of masked figures are waiting for her. Kiara has been placed inside a scarecrow again, right in the center of a structure resembling a gallows. Above this, Ricardo and Sophia are tied up and gagged. Suddenly, Fabrizio grabs Alisa from behind and pulls her back into the shack, where they both continue watching through the window. One of the hooded figures raises the jar with Kiara's tongue, and all the farmers start making a rhythmic sound with their mouths. Each of the other two hooded figures approaches a prisoner and removes one of their ears, taking it to a horrendous figure that already has Mark's eyes and Kiara's tongue. As the figure is hoisted by a rope, everyone begins to ring a bell hanging from their necks. When the face reaches the top of a huge scarecrow, Ricardo and Sophia are sacrificed. Alisa bursts into tears, not understanding how the three could have been taken without her waking up. Then she sees the beer bottle on the ground and remembers that only Fabrizio did not drink. He swears he is innocent, and she feels uncertain, not wanting to accuse him unjustly. But when they hug, she discovers that he does not have any ear problem. His apparatus is actually a point through which a female voice is now giving him orders and telling him to position Alisa under the deer on the wall. Fabrizio asks her to return his device and soon begins to lose control of himself. He starts pacing back and forth, screaming insults and saying that Alisa ruined everything. Then he stops in front of the deer and says that they can come for her. One of the hooded figures enters the shack, effortlessly pushing the table aside, and drags Alisa outside. She wakes up the next day with a bag over her head and her hands nailed to the arms of the chair. The farmers are seated at a long dining table, with their faces revealed for the first time. A boy with a deformed face is singing a song in praise of the three infernal knights, and the mayor is seated at the other end of the table. When Alisa begins to cry, everyone starts mimicking the sound, mocking her suffering. The mayor speaks with her, explaining that the mafia is not the same anymore and that everyone needs to adapt. A police car passes through the gate with the sign, Camp 3 Knights. Alisa starts screaming even more, but soon realizes that the policeman is in collusion with the mayor and is actually there to take her. One of the farmers pushes Alisa's chair into a control room where she watches videos of the event. Everything was set up by a professional production team, right down to the animal lying in the road. Then the screens come together to show Fabrizio's face, and he explains that this is all part of his horror movie. Full of resentment, he states that Italians never take their art seriously and bets that if he were American, they would have already ordered a sequel. Alisa bursts out laughing and tells him that this movie is trash because everything was copied from something that has already been done. This seems to irritate Fabrizio, and he quickly cuts off the conversation. With great effort, Alisa manages to free her hands and get out of the chair. Outside the room, there are a series of trailers and tents, as if it were indeed a film set. Her last hope is that she can still find Kiara, so she starts calling the girl's name until she sees her dress on a clothesline. In the tent next door, she finds the masks of the 3 knights hanging among all the others. Nearby, Fabrizio storms into his own trailer, yelling in rage because he still has to rethink the final scene now that the original script has been ruined. The person talking to him is none other than the girl Chiara. She is Fabrizio's sister and has never lost her tongue, as she is speaking quite well while playing on her phone. Alisa is devastated to discover this when she peeks through the window. Chiara reminds her brother that the client will want Alisa conscious. Very angry, Fabrizio starts cursing the mayor and her damned clients. The 2 siblings argue, and Chiara ends the fight with a loud slap to Fabrizio's face. A little later, she starts getting ready for another scene in the movie. However, as soon as she opens the trailer door, Alisa is standing next to a camera on a tripod, wearing one of the masks and holding a shotgun. She hits Chiara squarely, and Fabrizio is horrified. When he approaches the door, Alisa's gun jams for a moment, but she quickly fixes it and manages to hit him in the knee. Screaming in pain, he starts crawling on the floor, trying to warn someone that the main character has escaped. Alisa adjusts the camera to avoid missing the scene and goes after the director. With her foot on his chest, she refuses his pleas for mercy and tells him to relax because all of that is just a movie. Fabrizio starts cursing her again, and she silences him by pulling the trigger. After that, she looks at the camera and announces that this is the correct ending. Without Fabrizio to redirect the course like last time, she resumes her plan to walk in the same direction until she finds the limits of the forest. Upon hearing the sound of a twig snapping, she quickly turns around and points the gun at a little boy in swim gear. He flees in fear, and she drops the shotgun, running after him full of hope. As she suspected, this boy is with his family at a nearby beach and snuck into the woods. Following in his footsteps, she finally exits the secret part of the forest, marked as a military zone to deter curious onlookers. The beach is crowded, and the sunbathers find Alisa's appearance odd, filming everything with their phones. Remembering her own phone, she sees that her mother has sent several messages about the missed appointment and decides to leave the device in the sand before taking a swim.